Welcome to today's Curious Conversation. I'm here with Peter Smith. Thank you so much for being here, Peter.
Thank you for having me.
And you are the Director of Business Development for Vue. And I have a bunch of stuff I want to ask you because we've had several conversations recently with people that have to do with carbon neutrality and sustainability and kind of looking at it from a holistic view, maybe a view not everyone looks at it from. But before we get into that, I want to know a little bit about your why. You know, this is definitely something just in our conversations leading up to this that's very important to you. How did carbon neutrality become something that was so important to you?
Yeah, so not to rewind the clocks too far, but I had the opportunity to attend Colgate University, a liberal arts school in upstate New York, and exposed to a lot of different studies and coursework, and was undecided for my first 2 years as what I wanted to concentrate on.
You're in good company.
Yep. I ended up amassing a lot of courses in environmental studies and then math and econ. And it just so happened that they had newly launched a major that was environmental economics. It was a bit of a hybrid of the two.
Okay.
And so I ended up concentrating on that and really understanding this intersection between basically the concept of the triple bottom line. So how do you do right for the planet, do what's best for people, and then make a profit?
Yeah, still make money somehow.
Yeah. And so being able to hit all three of those, and that's really been a guiding point throughout my career. It's ebbed and flowed. I've focused a lot on the planetary health in my early part of my career. Time at Delos I spent on how do we make buildings better for humans, and continuing to try to seek out opportunities where I can help transform our industry, particularly the built environment, into what's beneficial for people and planet. So it's really been that doctrine around the triple bottom line that's driven me, and it's because of a passion for our outdoor wonders and the amazing planet that we inhabit. And now I'm a father of two, and know that I've got another generation to bestow this earth to, and to do what's best for them as well.
I forget. I was recently in I was in Missouri, and I was at a museum, and there was this plaque on the wall that said, "We're not preparing the earth for our children. We're not preparing. We didn't inherit the earth from our grandparents. We're borrowing it from our children." And I love that. I love that point of view. Was it something? Was there already an interest in the environmental side of things even before college, or was it something that you really found in college?
Partially found in college. Grew up, I was one of three boys, and so we spent every waking moment outside in the neighborhood, in the woods, whatever.
Yep.
And we traveled as a family, saw a lot of the national parks, and so just had an inherent sort of understanding of this planet and how fragile it really is. And then through coursework and deeper learning, better understanding those ecosystems and ways in which our footprints as humans affect those.
I'm curious, you're obviously a really smart guy. There's no doubt that you have a passion for this industry, but why? Like, of all the things that you could do, of all the different industries you could be in, why in so deep into this idea of carbon neutrality?
Yeah, so I mean, like I said, I think that my career growth has been around how do I affect change that's best for the planet and best for people.
Right.
And technology has an amazing capability to achieve both of those ends. Real estate is the biggest asset class in the world. Everybody touches real estate on a daily, hourly basis. It's ubiquitous. And so to me, there's this massive opportunity for impact. Being able to harness the power and capabilities of technology, applying that to real estate, and driving for better outcomes for people and planet. And so that's really my purpose and my why is to affect change as large as possible, and you can't get any larger than real estate.
You have the maximum impact there.
Yep.
Tell me something that you do that has nothing to do with work.
So I've got two kids, 3.5 and 1.5. Spent a lot of time doing Legos.
Yes.
So my son is actually in the process now of of graduating from Duplos to Legos.
Nice.
Which is very exciting for me.
That can be an iffy transition because Duplos, they put them in their mouth, it's not that big a deal. But Legos, there can be some accidents.
And his 1.5-year-old sister is
no
always
kidding.
on the periphery. So you got to be mindful. So yeah, spending a lot of time with my family. I mean, the kids are at an age right now where they're growing and learning so quickly. So yeah, definitely work-life balance.
Yeah, that's awesome. As you started to put a finger on carbon neutrality as kind of where your passions lie, I think there's at times it is becoming maybe more of a buzzword, and there's a lot of meaning and there's a lot of important information behind that. Why is it something that should be important to people who maybe have not either thought about carbon neutrality or experiencing it or contributing to it without realizing it?
Yeah, I mean, it touches upon the most macro issue, which is climate change, and the things that we do in terms of building buildings and operating buildings has a direct linkage and connection to our overall climate. And so, yes, sustainability and green building and ESG, these are huge terms now, and they've become to encompass a broad variety of aspects. Mm-hmm. But at the end of the day, we need to find ways in which to reduce our consumption of energy and be able to create a healthier environment for the planet. So, yeah, I think that there's a lot of trends and buzzwords that are out there.
Yeah.
But just inherently within all of us, we want to ensure that people can thrive for future generations off of our finite resources.
So let's talk a little bit about this idea of greenwashing. It's something we've come across in a couple of the conversations we've had with people, which is just the concept of big companies going in and basically buying credits that go against their carbon footprint or whatnot. But it's not really an authentic or original change. Mm-hmm. Versus the idea of making changes at the very foundational level of how you work as a company. Tell me a little bit about that dichotomy.
Yeah, so I think there's good intentions behind all of these movements. And then as they mature, there's more specificity given to them, right? So if you think about green building, for example, when green building started, people didn't really understand what does it mean to have a green building. Mm-hmm. And then you had an organization like the United States Green Building Council who established the LEED criteria. And so LEED certification has become the global benchmark for what it truly means to be a green building. And that goes all the way down to material selection, to testing of buildings and measuring for wastewater and energy consumption. So I think it's where you are in that point of maturity. But to your point around broader greenwashing, I think that it's some of it is with malicious intent. Yeah. People trying to just put lipstick on a pig, and it's more of a PR.
Yeah.
Others, it's just naivety. I think that they just aren't really sophisticated enough to understand what it means, and so they're trying to grab the low-hanging fruit.
They have good intentions, but they just don't understand the depth of the issue.
Exactly. And so, to your point about renewable energy credits, so RECs. So yeah, a building, in New York City here could be 100% powered by renewable energy, even though that renewable energy is being produced out in wind farms in Oklahoma. Right. And so that's one of the inherent problems with New York Metro here, is that we don't really have a tried and true renewable energy source. A lot of our renewables come from upstate and hydro and other places, but most of the energy the electrons that are being consumed in this building is derived from brown energy sources. And so we're at a place where we need to help to remediate that and basically find ways to bring in clean energy sources. And so companies are doing what they can do at their best based off of the given circumstances.
I would imagine having a measurable, all I can think of the word is original, but authentic impact or an individual impact as a company is something that, as you mentioned with New York, it's heavily based on where you are. Mm-hmm. The challenges that are facing a building or a company in New York are going to be different than one in California or Dallas or another place where there may be different options for renewable energy or ways to reduce your carbon footprint.
Absolutely, and that's actually playing out right now. So there's a law called Local Law 97 here in New York, and it's basically putting forth energy efficiency requirements for buildings of a certain size to be hit in different hurdles. And the first hurdle is coming up. And buildings need to hit that and prove that they can prove a level of energy efficiency, or they'll face punitive fines. And these are significant fines. The challenge being that there's a couple challenges. One is that these benchmarks are based off of a national average. And so there are buildings in other territories and states that have the benefit of being in a in a different place where they can start to glean more energy efficiency because of the siting of their building, the energy sources, what have you. Also the vintage of buildings in New York, right? So if you go to a Denver, the average life of a building there, age of a building there is much different than it is in New York. The other challenge that doesn't get enough attention is the fact that most of the energy that's consumed within a typical commercial office building is consumed by its tenants, right? And so the landlords are the ones that are on the hook for driving energy efficiency and will ultimately face these fines and penalties. But it's really, a lot of it's coming from the tenants. And so what we're seeing is a need to wring the towel and squeeze out as much efficiency as the landlord can on their base building side.
Yeah.
But then actively engage with their tenants to educate them and in some ways gamify it to make sure that they can also derive energy savings from their tenant spaces.
So it sounds like that's really changing and evolving the role of the landlord from maybe what it's traditionally been to evolving this new aspect of having to be responsible for the carbon neutrality of the building and the tenants inside of it.
Yeah, I mean, whether you're for or against the legislation, and there's been some pushback and some dialogue around that.
Sure.
I think it is forcing this conversation, which is a net benefit for all of us. When the pandemic hit, RXR's buildings emptied out, and yet there was still about 80% of the normal energy consumed within those buildings. So
That's
even though you ramp down your systems, you can't ramp them down all the way because there's lease obligations to deliver a certain temperature within those lease spaces. And then you've got plug loads and other things. People left the office, but they didn't unplug their computers. Their monitors were still on, TVs were still running, what have you. So it's really forcing this dialogue. And so leaders like RXR are beginning to centralize their energy. So taking readings from all their sub-meters across their portfolio to firstly benchmark and understand, okay, where are we consuming our energy, and then beginning to find ways in which to engage with their tenants. And this could be at a sort of a tenant executive level, or even like an individual consumer level.
For sure.
So one employee within a tenant to help them see that this is the challenge that we're both facing, and we need to be able to tackle this together.
So I think that's a really good segue into the idea of building data and understanding how to measure so many of these different metrics. You mentioned RXR, who you originally worked for, and then Workswell, the product was acquired by View, and now RXR is one of your biggest clients. Tell me a little bit about that transition.
Yeah, absolutely. So RXR, for those that aren't familiar, one of the largest landlords here in New York City. And they came to a realization about 3 or 4 years ago that they were amassing a number of different point solutions. And so these solutions were solving things like operations of our buildings and energy and experience. But they were traveling down a path of death by 1,000 dashboards. And so instead of carrying down that path, taking a step back and kind of understanding, okay, how do we make sense of all this and tie it together in a more cohesive way? And so they founded the Digital Lab, and so this was an internal innovation and technology team with a mandate to start to roll up all these disparate point solutions. And with these point solutions, there's a lot of data that was being used, but maybe not even being used. So we created the Workswell platform as a way to aggregate all the data into a singular centralized data lake, and then begun to run analytics on it, and then push out insights to our property management teams, our leasing teams, and even the average tenant or employee that's coming into our buildings.
I'm really curious. Were there some of those insights that surprised you? I mean, anytime you're dealing with a data bank of that much information, I'm sure there's things that that you expected, but were there unexpected things that you found?
Yeah, I mean, the energy one that I already mentioned was certainly one of those surprises. Throughout the pandemic, we were able to get a daily report on exactly where buildings were being occupied, and so we could see the ebbs and flows as we went through the various stages of the of variance and surges. And because their portfolio is split between Manhattan and then also a suburban portfolio, you could see variance between the behavior of occupiers out in Long Island versus in the city. And what we came to see was, and the data bore this, was that people were more inclined to go to the offices in the suburbs because they can get into a car and drive up to their office and walk right in, versus having to squeeze on the 456 train and wait in line for an elevator to go up to the 45th floor. So that is all uncovered as part of the data. There's hunches, right? I mean, our property management teams are in the buildings, and so they have a pulse for what's going on, but it gets substantiated and validated once you've got the data at your fingertips.
So how does those conclusions and insights, how does that translate into actionable things that can actually reduce the carbon footprint?
Absolutely. So you can't improve what you can't measure. Right? So firstly, you gotta measure it, make sure that it's accurate. Once you've done that, so in the case of energy, we can start to understand how buildings are performing against one another versus national averages and so on and so forth. And then you can start to identify more discrete energy efficiency upgrades and projects. And there's a lot of funding out there now from the city, from the state, and from the feds to basically drive ROI, near-term ROI for these projects. So understanding where there is opportunity to reduce energy or to find efficiencies, that sort of plays it out in the data.
Yeah, there. I'm somewhat familiar with View's products because we've tried to use some of their. We've bid projects to try and use some of their. The display film that goes over the windows for storytelling projects. I'm curious though, how do those products give you actionable data for the Workswell Databank?
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, most people know View from their great smart window product, and that's now across over 100 million square feet of real estate. What they started to do about 2 years ago was expand the product suite and looking beyond just smart glass. And looking at other smart building technologies and solutions. And so, we spun out Workswell from RXR and were acquired by View. They acquired a few other companies as well and have some in-house development. And so now in my team, we're working on this broader smart building product business line. And so this looking at how do we expand beyond just the facade of buildings and start to look internal. And so the windows themselves, they're electrochromatic. So there's a thin film on them. You send electricity through it, and it tints over the course of the day based off of the sun. In order to power those windows, you need to have a network in the building. Yeah. And so once you've established that network, then you can build on top of that network. That creates an IoT infrastructure. Mm-hmm. So then you can connect to other IoT devices, whether that be lighting systems, air quality sensors, occupancy sensors. The list goes on and on and on. So they kick off a whole bunch of data, all these sensors and the windows. And so you can start to amass that and get a digital profile of a building's performance over time. And that will then inform the operations teams, the head engineer, head of property management, to really find ways to fine tune their building as conditions change over time. The pandemic was a disruptive event. And so, the benefit of RXR of having this platform, deployed during the pandemic was because as those changes happened in real time, we could see that and then be able to take action against those. And what is that? You asked what are those actions? Right. Yeah. So some of them, center around energy, but some of them could be around air quality. So over 1,000 air quality sensors across RXR's portfolio, so we can see in real time how buildings are performing across 10 plus different air quality parameters. And so if there's a spike in particulate matter on floor 3 of X building, we can go investigate that and remediate it. Equally, we can start to understand this trade-off, this inherent trade-off between wanting to reduce energy, but also maintain comfort within buildings. Yeah. And so if you have air quality sensors, you can understand, what is that comfort range? And then we can play within that range and know if we're hitting up against the thresholds of temperature or humidity, so that we're not putting tenants in an uncomfortable position, but also trying to achieve energy goals.
So how does this, bringing it back to a human perspective, right, or an individual's perspective, how does this affect, or why should the average person that's in one of these buildings care? I mean, I get it on a big level, right? On a macro level, the importance of having a difference, in our global environments and efficiency and saving money in buildings. But for the individual, why should they care about this?
So ultimately, it can enhance their overall experience in the building. The pandemic really shone the light on healthy buildings or unhealthy buildings.
Yeah.
I spent the better part of 6 years developing, launching, and then scaling globally the WELL building standard, which, to go back to our earlier conversation, healthy buildings was this opaque concept.
Right.
We stepped in and created the WELL standard as a means to substantiate and document exactly what it means to have a healthy building. That took off during the pandemic because real estate owners and operators were struggling. They,
right.
In response to the pandemic, in response to their tenants, what do we need? What are the actions we need to take to prove that our buildings are healthy and
right.
safe for people to come back? And so now that standard has proliferated across the the industry across the globe. But the average individual now has, they're a little bit more sophisticated in knowing
sure.
some of these concepts, particularly air quality.
Yeah.
They've read up, they've educated themselves during the pandemic to know, what it means to have, elevated levels of carbon dioxide, what the airflow in a room
yeah.
looks like. If someone has COVID in the corner, what does it mean for me over here?
What are my chances over here? Yeah.
Exactly, yeah. And so I think that real estate owners can now be more proactive in saying, well, we've done our homework, we're measuring for air quality, and we'll publicize it. We'll show you that this is how we're stacking up against industry norms set forth by the EPA, or pick your body that you want to pin your thresholds to. And say that we're compliant with these things, so we can verifiably say that this is a safe and healthy building. Other enhancements to experience could be around utilization of amenity spaces. So as tenants come back to offices, they want to take advantage of the overall experience within the building, within the community,
right.
and so we can offer up to them, hey, when's the next peak traffic time in the lobby? And so maybe you want to avoid that and get lunch early or go a little bit later. So that's just data that's now at our fingertips, and we can put it into the hands through an experience app into the individuals and just have them be able to make better decisions throughout the course of their day.
Leading up to the conversation today, you used the term middleware, which I wasn't familiar with. Tell me a little bit about what middleware is.
Right. So if you think of a smart building tech stack, at the very bottom you have the infrastructure and the hardware. So that's all the mechanical systems, the lighting systems, it's sensor hardware. It's all the things that are physical and tangible and within the built environment. At the very top end, you have interfaces. You have UIs. These are dashboards and command centers that our property teams are using, and now tenants have an app.
Right.
And so they have an interface with the building. And so what middleware is essentially that. It sits in the middle.
It's the meat in the sandwich.
Yeah, it's the meat in the sandwich. I'm going to take that one. So it's basically taking all the infrastructure and hardware, pulling the data off of it, making sense of it, putting it into a structured, standardized format, and then being able to comb through that data and push it out in a way that's intelligible for those end users.
And I guess actionable.
And actionable, right, yeah. And so those end users could be an individual within the building, it could be a tenant within the building, someone who's running facilities for a particular floor, or it could be for the base building operators.
This idea of smart buildings was definitely around before the pandemic, but like in many technologies, the pandemic was a catalyst for rapid acceleration when it came to smart buildings. Can you give me a little bit of the idea of the evolution of smart buildings over the last, 5-10 years? Yeah.
I mean, we could rewind it even further. I mean, it's starting, pre-millennia, in the 80s, 90s, the concept of automated buildings. And again, I think technology sort of underpins the changing, role of buildings in our lives. Mm-hmm. And so these technological advancements have started to, show the ability for buildings to do more than just be a box that you occupy.
Yeah, exactly.
So automated buildings starts to bring in new technologies to make buildings more efficient. And then you have these discrete moments in time. And while the pandemic wasn't a singular event, you look at like 9/11, right? Like here in New York City, 9/11 happened, and all of a sudden buildings had to respond and become safe buildings. And so you saw new technologies and turnstiles and other things that became in vogue. Some are still around, and vestiges of that response to that event. COVID, I think, the onset of COVID in 2020 was a disrupting event.
For sure.
It's now lingered for over 2 years. But I think there were a lot of elements that were at play in terms of smart buildings that have been accelerated. Not necessarily changed because of the pandemic, but accelerated because of the pandemic. So smart buildings, the term is morphed into a lot of different meanings, but effectively it's taking advantage of all the new technologies that are available to building owners and making their buildings more responsive.
Using that as a base and as a history lesson, what do you think the future is? What comes in the next 3, 5, 10, 20 years?
Yeah, so a lot. I mean, I think that one thing that we can't deny is that flexibility is here to stay.
Yeah.
It was a trend, probably in isolation in few industries, few organizations pre-pandemic, but the cat's out of the bag now.
Yeah.
It's got staying power. What that means for industries and organizations remains to be seen. I think there's still going to be some bespokeness to what hybrid means for particular organizations, but there's no doubt that the 5 days a week in the office is not going to come back.
Yeah, it's not going to be the same way it was before pandemic at a minimum.
It won't. I was at a ULI event this morning, and they say, based off their research, they're suggesting that 3 is kind of netting out to be that magic number, 3 days of the week in the office. But again, what it means for different, it might be Monday, Wednesday, Friday for some, might be Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday for others. So flexibility is here to stay.
Well,
so
let me ask you on that, not to interrupt you, but one of the things that we've heard a lot about is it's going to have an increased priority on amenity spaces. Is that also being seen?
Yeah, definitely. And so I think that's the evolving role of the landlord and where we see the sort of the future of work is that the landlords, they're attracting tenants, but what they need to do is they need to also help to attract talent, right, for those tenants. And so increasingly, landlords are going to have to be more cooperative with tenants in order to be advocates for them. Basically going to bat for their large tenants, their prospective tenants, their existing tenants to say, we want to recruit the best talent and people to your organization, and we want your real estate and our buildings to play a critical role in that. And so, there's been an amenities arms race, but I think that's only continuing to ramp up, and it's not only just physical amenities anymore.
It's not just ping pong tables.
It's not just ping pong tables. No. Get rid of those ping pong tables. No, it's about other digital amenities as well, right? And so I've mentioned Experience app a few times.
Mm-hmm.
I mean, there's now a proliferation of companies that can offer an Experience app.
Is that like the digital twin? We've done a couple of conversations, particularly with Samantha Flores, who's the head of our Hugo group, and she's talked a lot about this idea of the digital twin. Is that the same idea?
It's different. So the Experience app is really meant to just be an app for the building. And so it gives you access to amenities. You can book events. You can order lunch on it. You can get visibility into the performance of the building. So when is there foot traffic? When is what is the air quality within my building? Events in the local community. So it's meant to be a digital touch point with tenants in order to give them a more holistic digital experience as they come to their buildings. Digital twin, talk about another term that's kind of morphed into a bigger concept.
Yeah.
So at the very core, digital twin is a digital representation of a physical object.
Right.
And so there are organizations and companies out there like a Willow that have a really amazing full fidelity 3D visual representation of a building.
Right.
And so they've worked with a couple projects here in New York where you can basically create an exact replica of a building in a digital environment. And so that helps designers and contractors as well as the operators throughout the life cycle of design, construction, and development, to be able to understand how all these pieces are fitting together, and then to track and measure and monitor them.
Get more data.
So get more data. So we, at View, we have a digital twin as well. However, we're less inclined on creating a really snazzy 3D visualization. Our definition of a twin is more a structured and normalized data model. Basically, do we have a consistent ontology for how we're getting data from all these disparate systems and organizing it in a manner that is intelligible, and we can take that and actually run analytics on it.
Because at the heart of it, the data is pretty useless unless you're able to make decisions and have actionable things come out of it.
Yeah, exactly. And that's what we always start from the value or the use case and then work backwards, right? So what are we trying to achieve? What's the sort of the outcome or the business logic? And then what do we need to get there? And so in some cases, a 3D visual representation might be helpful to get the sort of geospatial representation and understanding the relationships between different systems. But what we found is that more times than not, you don't need a full 3D representation. You just need to make sure that you kind of understand where the data is derived from and how it comes together.
You mentioned that COVID was this disruptive event, which we already talked about being a catalyst for so many things. Do you have any idea what the next disruptive event or technology is? Is there something out there that's maybe this moonshot idea, but if it works, it has the ability to change how we think about this?
I mean, there's been a lot of chatter around NFTs and the metaverse and blockchain. Professionally, I'm not very involved with that, but personally, it's very interesting and intriguing to me. I recently in January did a deep dive in NFTs because it kept on popping up and I just needed to educate myself. So I read a lot into it. I got pretty close to actually going through the full process of buying an NFT. And then realized that there's a single gas fees, which are transactional fees that are quite high. So I think that there's promise in the underlying technology in the blockchain, for example. However, like the early days of the internet, a lot of those, 1.0, Internet 1.0 companies, they failed. But there's going to be a second generation of companies that I think are going to begin to get a better sense of the applicability of that underlying technology and start to take hold.
To take a better foundation in what's there.
A better sense of how to actually apply the technology. I think, right now it's just a Wild West, right? And you've got these NFT projects that are, the price on these NFTs are going crazy.
I feel like I see, and it's not just one kind. I see all kinds of different NFTs. Like everybody is trying to figure out exactly how to make it work for them.
Yes, and so I think most of those projects are likely to go to zero, but there'll be a next generation of companies and applications that I think will take hold. One of which I think that's really interesting is around decentralized finance. So the way real estate is developed and financed can change pretty dramatically. We have companies who are already starting to scratch that surface that are doing crowdsourced fundraising. So there's a company called Fundrise. And so, you can be a small investor in a larger development project. But with the blockchain, there's the ability to do that at scale. And so I think that there's some excitement that could come with that concept.
Well, Peter, thank you so much for having this conversation with me. And this was actually, most people may not know this. This was take 2 because we were going to have this conversation a couple of months ago, and due to schedules, it just didn't work out. So I appreciate you coming back around and making this a priority. Thank you so much for watching and for listening. If you want to know more about Peter and some of the things that we've talked about today, check out the description below and check out the next episode of TheSquare.